We anthropologists have always been interested in the variation and humans across socio-cultural and geographic dimensions. These variations often demonstrate the adaptive responses to the induced environment, which involve the basic patterns of growth and development during different phases of lifespan: infancy, childhood, adulthood, and in between childhood and adulthood, the phase of adolescence. From fetus to child, the development leads to the reconciliation of a particular adult size, and that is why we say that it is not only the growth which is there or the increase in the matter which is involved in growth, but it is also substantiated by the development as well as the differentiation. When we talk about growth, and which we see during adult individual, then we see the variation also among individuals. These variations are not in the adulthood only, but they take place their origin in the childhood, and they result because of the nutritional intake, the environment, as well as the diseases which take place in the children. When all of these environmental factors interact with the genetic potential, then it results into the particular variation seen among the human or the human population. In module 1, we will study about the different stages of growth, and we will talk about the patterns of growth as well as the theories of growth for different stages of life, that is infancy, childhood, adolescent and adulthood. And we will see the different factors associated with growth, that is the physical environment as well as the genetical. We will also look towards what are the abnormalities of growth or the factors which lead to the abnormal growth and development. Along with these, we will also in module 1 study about the interaction of the environment and the genetical factors contributing to the stages of the growth.
Growth, it refers to quantitative increase in size of the body as a whole or specific part of the body. According to British Medical Dictionary, defined it as progressive development of a living organism or part of an organism from its earlier stage to maturity with an attendant increase in size. The increase in size is a consequence of assimilation of nutrients into the protoplasm, expansion of cell cytoplasm and cell multiplication. These cellular processes underlying growth are termed as hyperplasia, hypertrophy and accretion. Hyperplasia refers to an increase in cell numbers through mitotic cell division. The replicated chromosome migrates into functional and identical cells. In hypertrophy, there is an increase in cell size which is due to accumulation of protein and substrates. While in accretion, there is an increase in intercellular substances. This binds the cells into complex network. The example could be a collagen fiber which binds the adipose tissue in adipocytes. These processes, that is hyperplasia, hypertrophy and accretion, occur simultaneously during growth, but the predominance of one or another process varies with age and the tissue involved. Now we will define the term development. The development is the progressional change, either quantitative or qualitative, that leads from an undifferentiated or immature state to a highly organized, specialized and mature state. It is described within two distinct domains, biological and behavioral. In biological context, it includes differentiation and specialization of pluripotent embryonic stem cells into different cell types, tissues, organs and functional unit. As we could see in the figure, fusion of sperm and egg produced zygote. This zygote underwent division and eventually formed blastocyst. This blastocyst has a mass of undifferentiated pluripotent stem cells which have the potential to become different type of specialized cell such as muscle, neuron, blood cells and others. These specialized cells form tissue and organ to carry out specific function in an individual, which include circulatory, respiratory, neural and other system. Onset of a function in a particular tissue or organ characterized attainment of complete differentiation. It occurs in prenatal life. When we talk about behavioral domain, it includes social, cognitive and emotional development, that is, acquisition and refinement of behavior, which could be understanding and expression of emotions, perception about others, self-awareness, abstract thinking, learning and reasoning. It depends on the basis of culture in which a child is born and reared. The other parameters of behavioral domain is motor skills, which relate to acquisition of enhanced proficiency for a specific motor task. This varies from postural control to coordination of movements. For instance, an infant is first able to hold his head up with the help of his hands. Then he learns to sit straight without support. Eventually he begins to crawl, walk with support, and then independently he is able to walk. The other example could be the hand-eye coordination while working at any task. Now we are clear about the term growth and development, but as this process go together, we need to understand the difference between the two terms. Growth refers to quantitative change in physical characteristics of an individual, such as increase in height, size, weight, and others. Development implies overall change in form and structure qualitatively for enhanced functional skills. Developmental in quantitative aspect is termed as growth, while development in itself is a wider and comprehensive term which depicts overall change in an individual such as cognitive, emotional, social and acquisition of improvised skills. Growth does not continue throughout the life and it stops when maturity is attained, while development is a progressive and continuous process which continues throughout the life. The physical change acquired during growth could be measured directly, but in case of development, functional and behavioral change acquired during development are difficult to measure directly. By the term maturation, we define it as the progression toward the mature biological state, or in other words, it's the process of becoming mature. Maturation level varies with the biological system considers. It could be endocrine, reproductive, skeleton, digestive or immunological. Individual ends up as adult with a fully ossified skeleton, but they reach this stage at different times and attain different adult heights. These variations may be designated to differences in maturation timing and tempo of the associated biological system. Here by the timing we refers to when a specific maturation event occurs, that is, age of appearance of pubic hairs in boys and girls, or age at maximum growth during adolescent growth spurt. The tempo here implies to the rate at which maturation progresses. Now we need to understand the basic difference between growth and maturation. Growth focuses on size attained at a given point of time, whereas the later focuses on progress, or in other terms we can say the rate in attaining adult size and maturity. However, both processes must be viewed as dynamic cellular processes which target achievement of mature adult state from conception. The endpoint of maturation is the attainment of functionally mature individual who is able to successfully procreate and raise offspring. The children of similar chronicle age may differ by several years in their level of biological maturity. For instance, among girls who are aged 12 years, some are sexually mature while the others will mature in next several years. Growth, maturation and development occurs in a time frame. They are measured at a single point of time or several points over time. Now we would discuss the basic principles which underlie growth and development. The first one is cephalocaudal and proximodistal development. These explain the direction of growth in an individual. The cephalocaudal refers to development of an individual which proceeds from head to toe. As we could see in the figure, in an embryo, the head is approximately half the total body length. However, by the time of birth, the proportion of head is reduced to approximately 1/3 of the total body length, and it becomes further reduced as limbs and trunk grow increasingly faster. The figure could clearly depict the expression. In terms of motor skills, the infant shows voluntary control of the head and shoulders before the control of limbs. While in case of proximodistal development, the growth proceeds from the center of body to the periphery. If we take the example, an infant acquires control over the muscle of the neck and trunk before coordination of hands and fingers. The next principle defines development as continuous process. This is a predictable process which continues and includes physical, motor and behavioral development in early life, leading the child to maturity. Change is continuous even after maturity has been attained and progresses to senescence and death. It follows a sequential pattern where the initial phase of growth and development lays foundation for the next phase. As a child develops, new skills acquired become the basis for further achievement and mastery of skills. For instance, there is a predictable sequence of development that occurs before walking. The infant learns to stand with the help of furniture or any other article, then he eventually walks independently without any support. Children learn to hold a pencil or a crayon before they write or draw. The third principle defines development to proceed from general to specific. As we see, the infant movements are very generalized. They are undirected and reflexive initially, such as waving arm or move whole body. But as the child grows, in later response to physical and motor development, they become capable of making specific responses, or they could creep towards an object. The infant grasps an object with the whole hand before using only the thumb and forefingers. This is due to the development in large muscle movement to more refined smaller muscle movements. Another principle says that development proceeds at different rates. Although each child follows a general pattern and sequence of growth and development, but the rate at which individual child reaches various developmental stage will be different. There are interspersed periods of great intensity versus plateau. From birth to early childhood, both stature and weight shows a rapid gain in infancy and early childhood, steady gain during mid-childhood, rapid gain during adolescence phase, and slow growth with the attainment of adult stature. A marked individual differences is observed due to age and sex of the child. For instance, during early adolescence phase, girls are taller and heavier than boys due to earlier growth spurt. but as the boys attain growth spurt, they catch up and eventually suppress girls in body size. Furthermore, the rates of development across different domains also may not be uniform within an individual child. Some children will walk at 10 months while others walk at few months older, that could be at 18 months of age. A child's intellectual development may progress faster than his emotional or social development. The last principle explains development as an interrelated process where genetic, environmental, and behavioral processes interact with each other for the development of a child. The gene determine the potential of a growth child to achieve optimal development, but it could be influenced by the socio-cultural and physical environment in which the child is born and reared. Maturation, referring to sequential development of cognitive and motor skill over time, interacts with child's experience in a given environment, which leads to an overall development. As we could see, a child cannot feed itself until he or she can sit up and develop the ability to grasp the things between fingers and thumb. Similarly, the speech development of a child is affected if the child has difficulties in learning or hearing clearly, or if no one talks directly to him or her. Thus, the development of a child to their potential requires support and guidance from others in their lives. It could be their parents, their grandparents, friends, or their siblings. A child who does not receive love and attention may fail to grow and development. Abstract thinking and social behavior during the process of maturation develop according to peer and family environment they share. Till now, we have discussed the basic terminology and principles related to growth, development and maturation. Now we need to understand the graphs which could be used to study the growth pattern of an individual. It is obtained when measurements taken at specific interval are plotted against time. Here the time refers to the age. It would provide an estimate for the total amount of growth achieved. For instance, if a child is measured every year till the age of 18, then the graph plotted by joining up this data would provide a line representing the growth achieved at a given moment or at successive time. These graphs in which the measurements are plotted against the time, or we can say chronological age it was taken, is called distance curve. For example, height gained for a given age reflects how far the child has progressed towards the adulthood. However, the growth is not a linear process, as we could not gain the same amount of height each year. An apparent change in the rate of growth is associated with each stage of development. The curve representing the variation in rate of growth with time is known as velocity. As we could see in the graph also, you could clearly depict the difference between the distance curve and the velocity curve. The distance curve shows the growth in height along with the age and determine that the growth is a linear process. But when we look at the velocity curve, we could see that the graph represents rapid growth during childhood and adolescence, and after that, as the child becomes adult, the growth reaches plateau. After being familiar with the type of growth curve, we would now study the basic pattern of growth. The non-human organisms share the basic sigmoid curve of growth, which is characterized by single peak. The initial period of maximum growth rate or acceleration is followed by period of deceleration. The usual sigmoid curve is modified in case of human, and it is marked by two sigmoid curves, one in early life, the infant phase, and the other in adolescent phase. They are separated by a period of relatively slow growth rate during childhood. A rapid growth during childhood, known as mid-growth spurt, is also observed, but it is not a universal phenomenon. The curve shown here represents the general growth curve of an individual, but different organs have their own pattern of growth. In 1930, Richard Scammon proposed that the growth of different tissues and systems could be summarized in 4 patterns. These are journal curve. The journal curve, as we have discussed earlier also, is the same which represents the growth of a body as a whole and most of the system of the body, which include skeleton, respiratory, digestive, urinary, circulatory. Circulatory system includes both heart and blood vessels. The sigmoid, or what we can say S-shaped curve, represent 4 phases of growth. Rapid growth in infancy and childhood, steady but constant growth during middle childhood, rapid growth during the adolescence, slow and eventual cessation of growth after adolescence, which continues into the 3rd decade of life. The next curve is neural curve. It characterizes the growth of brain, nervous system and associated structure such as eyes, upper face and parts of skull. These tissues experience rapid growth in postnatal life, so that about 95% of total increment in this size is attained by the age of 7 years. After 7 years, the neural tissue shows steady gain with slight growth spurt during adolescence. Now we come to reproductive curve. Reproductive curve illustrate the growth pattern of primary sexual characteristics, which is ovaries, uterus in females, testes, seminal vesicle and others in males, and the secondary sexual characteristics, which include such as breast in females, larynx in males and pubic hair in both. These tissue shows slight growth in infancy, but with the latent period during childhood, and it observes rapid growth and maturation during adolescence. The last is lymphoid curve. The lymphoid curve depicts the lymphatic system, which include thymus, tonsils, spleen and lymph nodes, which act as a circulatory system for tissue fluid, and they develop immunological capacities. The lymphoid curve demonstrates a rapid growth until early adolescent years. Later it declines, perhaps as a result of the activities of sex hormone during puberty. Now we will discuss about the term canalization, and the related terms include catch-up growth and cash-down growth. At conception, individual obtain a genetic blueprint which determines the potential for achieving adult size and shape. In an unconstrained or neutral environment, individual would exhibit a pattern of growth that is more or less parallel to the genetically determined trajectory. This phenomenon was described as canalization, and the other term is homeostasis by the British genetist C.H. Waddington. However, none of us has lived or been brought up in a completely unconstrained environment. During the prenatal and postnatal life, we are exposed to an array of adverse environmental factors which influences the growth velocity. These factors could be disease, malnutrition or others. When growth slows down, or in more severe cases, it is known as cash-down growth. The amount of deviation from the predetermined pathway, or in other terms we can say from the normal growth pathway, it depends on frequency, duration and severity of exposure to the environmental factors. Slight exposure for short duration will cause minor change in the growth velocity as compared to the considerable exposure for long duration. The extent of influence is also determined by age and gender of the individual. However, when condition improves, there exists an ability to stabilize and return to a predetermined growth curve. During such recovery phase, initial growth velocity is above that of normally expected for the child of his age or even of his skeletal maturity, and it later declines as the child recovers. This rapid increase in growth velocity following a short-term period of starvation or illness was termed as catch-up growth by Prader. Catch-up growth may completely restore the scenario to normal, or it may be insufficient to do so. If it is incomplete, the individual does not achieve the same adult height that would have been achieved when there was no growth impairment. This depends on the extent to which conditions are optimized during recovery. Turner has described distinguished temporal pattern of catch-up growth, which follows prenatal and postnatal growth restriction. Type A pattern is characterized by transient increase in growth velocity until the deficit is eliminated. It is followed by normal velocity when normal growth is achieved. Such patterns are common in infancy and childhood when a child recovers from starvation or illness. Another is type B pattern, which shows growth at low velocity for a longer duration, which may extend beyond usual age with a delay in onset of puberty. Critical and sensitive period. When we say that growth pattern is influenced by environmental factors, we need to understand that there are phases of development when environmental exposure have long-term biological and behavioral consequences than at other times. These consequences could eventually influence the health potential of an individual in a favorable or unfavorable direction. The period during which certain kind of environmental stimuli are necessary for normal growth, but absence of these stimuli could produce permanent irreversible consequences, is known as critical period. But the period when organisms are susceptible to certain kind of stimuli in the environment, but the absence of these stimuli does not always produce irreversible consequences. It is known as sensitive period. Here the chart reviews crucial stages in human development from fertilization through birth. It focuses on the prenatal developmental stages during which children may be particularly sensitive to exposure to agents or may be at risk of adverse effects that would not occur if exposure occurred during adulthood. Identifying this critical period is essential to developing strategies that protect child from adverse health effects associated with environmental and non-environmental exposures. After being acquainted with the terms and phenomena, we should know why this phenomenon should be studied. First of all, we will talk about human variability. An array of environmental factors such as nutrition, disease, physical activity and others interact with genetic potential of an individual during the years of growth and maturation. This results into a wide range of inter and intra-population variation through differential rate of growth of particular part of the body relative to others. Understanding this biological variation in terms of origin and distribution among different populations underlie the significance of conceptual knowledge of these phenomena. The next is health status. The assessment of growth and maturity at periodical intervals monitors the growth status of a child and it identifies deviation from the normal growth, if any. When compared with the healthy children of similar age and sex, it indicated that overall health and nutritional circumstances in a community. This approach is often used in the context of nutritional status and general health surveys. Growth progresses from child to adulthood. The measurement of a child at specific interval of time provide an estimate for the rate of growth and maturation. It estimates the level of biological maturity for the child's chronological age, whether early, late or average. In other terms, we can say it to be advanced, delayed or appropriate. A child who grows 5 cm over a period of 1 year has a growth rate of 5 cm per year. The measurement over time on the same individual trace the constancy in the growth indicators from childhood through adolescence and to adulthood. Several studies have predicted the tendency of overweight adolescents to become overweight adult by measuring or observing similar individual over period of time. However, there are several factors which may influence the prediction. These could be interval between the measurements, age at first observation, timing and tempo of adolescence spurt, significant environmental change and measurement variability. Now we will talk about the physical activity and performance. Regular participation in physical activity is presumably necessary for optimal growth and maturation of a child. However, to evaluate and recognize the potential effect of activity, one should have the understanding of normal process of growth and maturation. Also, the performance of an individual is influenced by growth and maturation status. Among boys of similar age, those who are biologically mature tend to be taller, heavier and stronger than boys who have not matured yet. Muscular strength is related to body size and such provide an advantage to athletes in variety of sports such as gymnastics, divers, etc. Now the last point is evolution. Over a period of time, humans have evolved morphologically and physiologically to adapt to the surrounding environment. The evolution of morphological characters is the consequence of alteration in the inherited pattern of human growth and development. Thus, the study of growth is crucial in understanding the mechanism of evolution.
An individual in its lifespan not only grows biologically but also behaviorally with proficiency in motor skills. In contrast environment, growth curve deviates from the genetic potential of an individual. The probability of resuming to the normal growth curve depends upon the intensity and duration of insult. Understanding human variability, which has its origin in younger age groups and is affected by environmental processes on the growing individual or the child, is dependent upon the nutritional intake, infant and childhood diseases, patterns of physical activity and other environmental stress. All these interact with the genetic potential of an individual and results in the wide range of variation among individuals. Now, the current interest about the association of the growth with the nutritional status helps us to evaluate the different factors which may cause a deviation of the child or the growing individual from the normal growth pattern. How a child compares with other children of the same age and sex in relation to the different growth stages also makes it evident to study these patterns. We also study the different body types and how we differentiate them with the different stages of growth. So, in the present module 1, we have studied how the different stages of growth are present in the total lifespan of an individual and how we can differentiate the different stages and how an individual is actually not growing only with the addition of matter to the content, but it is alongside with the development as well as the differentiation. He is acquiring a particular level of development. So, growth along with development and differentiation together we can say make an individual, and these are affected by, of course, environmental stresses, nutritional status, and a lot of other factors, including the genetic potential of the individual. So growth as such is the interaction of all these factors together. This is what we have studied in this particular module. Thank you.